Hello. I hope you find this story interesting. Your feedback, suggestions, and subscriptions are always welcome. Life is the kind of thing that can knock you out of your rut at any moment. Today you are confident in the future, have a roof over your head, money in your account, and, most importantly, a loved one by your side. And tomorrow you may be left with nothing. I know this because I used to think I had everything. A house, a business, a steady income, and most importantly, a woman with whom I lived for many years. We built this life together, went through difficulties together. At least, that's how it seemed to me. And then she left. But she left for a reason. She left taking everything. My house, my money, even my respect, because after what happened, I looked like a fool in my own eyes. And I didn't want to see anyone. I didn't want to talk about it. It was hard to accept the truth that my whole life was a lie. I started from scratch. I was building a new life until she came back. Yes, 10 years after she destroyed me, she knocked on my door again. She looked completely different from how I remembered her. Tired, exhausted, with eyes full of fear and hope. And she said words that I could not even imagine. Help me. Are you wondering what happened next? Then listen carefully, because this story is not about how I lost everything. This is the story of how I found the strength to get back more than I had, and maybe even more than I wanted. Let's go back to the beginning, to the moment when it all started. I met her when I was a little over 40. The time when you already understand well what you want from life, and somehow you don't believe in romantic nonsense. But with her, it was different. She appeared in my life suddenly, a beautiful, confident, with that special twinkle in her eye that makes a man think. Here she is, just the one. Her name was Linda. She worked for a real estate company, was smart, independent, and seemed to know how to live a good life. I met her at a viewing of a house I wanted to buy. I was hesitating for a long time, considering options, and she skillfully talked about the advantages of each option, as if she read my mind. You are a man who knows what he wants, she said with a smile when I finally chose the right house. And you are a woman who can sell anything? I joked. She laughed, and at that moment I already realized that this was not our last meeting. Our relationship developed quickly. She immediately made it clear that she was used to the good life. Expensive restaurants, traveling, gifts. I didn't even notice how I got involved in this rhythm. But did I regret it? No. At the time, it seemed to me that I had found someone with whom I could share my life. A year later, we got married. The wedding was not big, but it was stylish. Linda insisted that it was not the scale that mattered to her, but the right people by her side. We settled in the very house she sold me. Symbolic, isn't it? Years went by. I worked, earned money, and she kept the house, although she spent more time in salons, meeting friends, and shopping. I didn't mind. After all, everyone has their own interests. In addition, we had a passion. We had moments when we sincerely laughed together. But from time to time, I had a strange feeling. Like something was wrong. Like Linda wasn't being completely honest with me. She was getting colder. Her gaze, once full of warmth, was now empty. It was as if she was looking right through me. When I asked her what was wrong, she laughed and, you're just tired. Everything is fine, my love. And I believed her, because I wanted to believe. But one day, reality slapped me in the face, and I couldn't recover from it for a very long time. I always believed that if you put your heart, honesty, and work into a relationship, everything will be fine. But life had its own point of view. The first alarm bell rang when Linda started to be late for meetings more and more often. I didn't pay attention at first. She had work, clients, deals. It was logical that she was busy. But then changes in her behavior began. She became distant and irritable. She always had her phone with her, and while she used to leave it on the table or in the kitchen, she never let it out of her hands. One night I woke up in the middle of the night and Linda was not in bed. My heart was in my throat. I went to the kitchen. It was empty. I went around the house, no one was there. I went out to the veranda, and there she was. Of us standing in the dark, the light of the phone casting a bluish glow on her face. She is texting someone. What are you doing up? I asked. She flinched and quickly turned off the screen. She woke up and couldn't get back to sleep, and I decided to get some air. For the first time in a long time, I felt something like fear. Not the kind that binds your body, but the kind that sits inside your chest and doesn't let go. The following weeks were tense. I started to notice things I didn't want to see before. She often checked the mirror before leaving the house. She didn't just fix her hair, but diligently put on makeup, chose clothes that emphasized her figure. Knew she began to smell different. New perfumes that she had never worn for me. She hardly touched me, a coldness that chilled me to the bone. I could have turned a blind eye to it, told myself that it was just a crisis in the relationship. But fate decided that I had to find out the truth harshly and without mercy. Everything came to light by accident. I had to go on a business trip. I was already in the car when I realized that I had forgotten my documents. I returned home and heard voices. Her voice and man's. My heart was pounding in my chest as if I was being driven to execution. I entered the house quietly, like a thief. They were in our bedroom. His voice was low, confident. Is he leaving soon? Her voice was frivolous, as if she were discussing the weather. He's already gone. The house is free for the evening. I don't remember opening the door. I don't remember what I said. I only remember her eyes, first horror, then calmness. She didn't even try to justify herself. She just looked at me as if I were a random person on the street. I think you should leave, she said, clutching her robe around her chest, and that was it. No tears, no apologies, no remorse. That day I realized that I was living with a stranger. The divorce was dirty. Linda was not just a traitor. She was a cunning and cold-blooded predator. She knew the law. She knew how to play the game. She had lawyers. She had arguments. She had a strategy. When it was all over, I was left without a house, without most of my money, and with the feeling that I had been simply erased from my life. She got to keep what she wanted. And me, I was left with nothing. But life is unpredictable, and in 10 years, everything will turn out completely differently. Divorce is not just a signature on paper. This is the moment when your heart is torn out, and then you are forced to pay for it. The first months after the trial, I existed on autopilot. I didn't have a home. I rented a tiny apartment with a couch and an old TV. I had no money. Most of it went to Linda, including my retirement savings. And worst of all, there was no point. I woke up every morning and didn't understand why. The problems came in a group. I lost my job. My old connections in the business, which had been strong before, were now turning their backs on me. I was no longer the John who was always in the money. I became the one who lost everything. Depression hit me like a cold wave, and I stopped leaving the house. I lived on fast food and cheap beer. I didn't care about anything. One day, I stood in front of the mirror and looked at myself for the first time in a long time. My eyes were blurry, my stubble was week-old, and I had extra pounds on my stomach from beer and pizza. Who was that? Definitely not the man I used to be. I realized either I change my life or life will simply end, and I forced myself to go outside. At first, I just walked around the neighborhood. Then I started running, small steps. I found a part-time job not in my specialty, not prestigious, but it gave me money. I met new people. I pushed some people away, let others into my life. It took me 3 years to feel like I could breathe again. I was no longer that John who blindly trusted people. But I was alive. And 10 years later, something happened that I didn't expect. Linda knocked on my door, and there was fear in her eyes. Linda stood on my doorstep, her eyes darting around as if she didn't know what to say. I looked at her in silence. 10 years ago, she threw me out of her life, taking my house, my money, everything, and now she's here, John. Her voice was weak, almost broken. I need your help. And that's when I realized that the world can laugh ironically after all. I hadn't seen her all these years. At first I suffered, tormented by resentment and anger. Then I accepted it. My new path was not what I had planned. I didn't become rich. I didn't get my business back. I didn't buy a new luxury house. But I became a man again who is not afraid to look in the mirror. I changed my job, opened a small handyman company. The villain and I started living simply, without unnecessary ambitions, without false friends. And you know what? I was happy. And now Linda stood in front of me as if from another life, like a ghost from the past. I didn't invite her in right away. I just stood there and watched. She had aged, but not in the way that people who are at peace with themselves age. Her face was exhausted, her eyes tired. What do you want?" I finally asked. She pressed her lips together as if she was deciding how best to answer. Everything has gone wrong for me," she finally said. "Jerry left me. The business he started went bankrupt. There is almost no money. Jerry, the same man she had ruined our lives for. I should have felt gloating. But no, there was only cold, indifferent surprise inside. I have nowhere to live. She looked down. The house is sold. I thought maybe you could help. Here it is. 10 years ago, she did everything she could to make me homeless. And now she's asking for help. The world really is a round place." "Why me?" I asked. She looked up at me. "Because you are a good man," I laughed. I laughed out loud. It was not just a laugh. It was an explosion of everything I had been holding in all these years. She was expecting sympathy. She thought I was still that knave fool who was ready to give her everything. But I had long ago taken a different path, and it didn't lead back. The doorbell rang unexpectedly. I glanced at the clock. It was almost 9 in the evening. Who could it be? I was in no hurry to open the door. I hadn't had any uninvited guests in my life for a long time. No old acquaintances, no casual visits. But the bell rang again. I sighed heavily and moved to the door. I opened it and froze. It was Linda. No, the same eyes, the same face, but something had changed. She looked exhausted. Her confidence, with which she had once taken everything from life, had crumbled to dust. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "Hello, John," she finally whispered, and I stared. I looked at the woman who had once been everything to me, who had once destroyed me without the slightest remorse. And now she was here. I remembered how it all happened. Apita, she left me easily. No tears, no regrets. She took everything, my house, my money, my car. I was left with empty pockets and a broken heart, and she went to him, to Jerry, a businessman who seemed to her the best option. At the time, I thought it was the end, but as it turned out, it was just the beginning. I found the strength to start from scratch. Another job, other friends, another life. And now, 10 years later, she is standing on my doorstep again. I did not invite her into the house. I just stood there and waited. She was nervously clutching her purse. "John, I know I have no right to ask for anything." I was silent, but I have no one else to turn to. "Oh, this is interesting." I crossed my arms over my chest. "What happened?" She pursed her lips. "Jerry, he wasn't what I thought he was." I could hardly contain my laughter. "Did he?" She nodded. "He went bankrupt. Left me penniless. Classic." I looked at her again. 10 years ago, she kicked me out of my own house, and now she's standing in front of me, looking me in the eye pleadingly. I nodded slowly. "So you mean you need my help now?" She remained silent. And I took a deep breath. Fate has a strange humor. I could have just closed the door, tell her to get out. But something told me that this was not over. This game was just beginning. Linda was sitting across from me, clutching a cup of tea that she wasn't even trying to drink. Her fingers were nervously fiddling with the handle of the cup, and her eyes were wandering around the room, as if she were looking for the right words. I didn't rush her. I just waited in silence. She took a breath. I know you hate me, John. And you have every right to." I didn't say anything. But please listen to me. She began her story, choosing her words carefully. After the divorce, she felt confident. She had a house, money, a new life. Jerry was what she had always considered her perfect match. He spoiled her with expensive gifts, took her on vacation, made her feel like a queen. Everything seemed right. Everything looked like she had made the right choice. I thought at the time that life had finally become the way I wanted it to be, she said, sighing. But it was an illusion. A few years later, things started to change. Jerry began to withdraw. Fewer and fewer gifts, more and more work. He stopped inviting her to expensive dinners, and then he avoided talking to her altogether. I asked him what was going on, but he always brushed it off. She continued, saying he had everything under control. She believed him, until she found out the truth. One night, Jerry came home late. He was drunk, and it was the first time. Linda began to question him, and he snapped. He yelled that she didn't understand, that his business was falling apart, that he was in debt, that her beautiful life was just an illusion. She was stunned. He lied to me for years, she said quietly. I didn't know we were living on money we didn't have. Things got even worse. The bank started demanding repayment of the loans. Jerry sold everything he could sell, and then he disappeared. Linda was left with nothing. No home. No future. I thought I was smart. She smiled bitterly. I thought I made the right choice. She looked me in the eyes. But I was wrong. I listened to her in silence. She was waiting for my reaction. She was waiting for me to say something. But I just looked at her. At the woman who had once ruined my life, and now she was sitting in front of me, ruined by her own choices. Linda sighed. I'm not asking you to forgive me, John. I know I don't deserve it. I raised an eyebrow. Then what are you doing here? She pursed her lips. I have nowhere else to live. This is it, the real reason, I smiled. And you thought I was just going to let you back into my life. She didn't say anything. I looked at her, feeling something change inside. 10 years ago, she had deprived me of everything, and now fate has brought her here. With the same misfortune she had once left me with. But I didn't know what to do with it yet. Linda sat in front of me, her shoulders slumped, her confidence, once so unshakable, gone without a trace. She was waiting for my answer. I could see her hands trembling a little. I saw how afraid she was of my decision. 10 years ago, she didn't even look at me when she kicked me out of the house. Now she looks me straight in the eye, begging for help. I leaned forward. What do you want from me, Linda? She swallowed the lump in her throat. I don't know where to live. I have nothing left. I whistled. Nothing. You had a house, bills, a fancy life. She lowered her head. Everything went to paying off debts. This was it. She was right back where she had left me. I got up from the chair, walked around the room, making her wait. Let her feel the tension. I could kick you out right now, I said at last. She remained silent, but I'm not going to do that. There was hope in her eyes. Or wasn't it? I smiled. Yeah, I'll give you a chance. Linda stood upright. I'll do anything, John. Please, just help me. I pointed to the kitchen. Then make us dinner. She was surprised. What? You said you'd do anything. Start with something simple. Linda hesitantly stood up and headed for the kitchen. I sat down in a chair, watching her move awkwardly around the stove. She had never touched a pot before. I always did everything myself. And now she's standing there, taking a frying pan off the shelf, clearly not knowing what to do with it. I could see her confusion. Is something wrong? I asked, enjoying the moment. She smiled nervously. I just haven't cooked for a long time. I nodded. So it was time to learn. A week had passed since Linda had been staying with me, and I hadn't let her relax. She woke up before me and made breakfast. She cleaned the house, although she had never even touched a rag before. I could see how hard it was for her. I didn't think it was that hard. She mumbled once while mopping the floor. I laughed. 10 years ago, it was not easy for me either. She looked at me with guilty eyes. I knew she understood it was my way of paying back. But was it enough? One evening, she knocked on my room door. Can I come in? I nodded. She came in and sat down across from me. John, I know you hate me. I didn't say anything. But you let me in the house anyway. Why? I looked at her long and hard. I wanted to see how you had changed. She sighed. And what? I leaned closer. I haven't decided yet. She lowered her head. I saw her struggling with herself. If you want me to leave, just say so. I thought about it. Did I want her to leave? I used to dream about this moment, but now that it had come, I wasn't sure what I wanted. The next day, I called her to talk to me. I have a proposal, I said, looking her in the eye. She tensed up. I am listening. I smiled. Alita, if you really want to fix what you've done, you have to pass one more test. She flinched, but nodded. I'm ready. I leaned forward, looking her straight in the eye. Think twice, Linda. Because after this, you won't be able to just drop everything and walk away. She sighed. What do you want me to do? I paused, savoring the moment. You have to stay and work here. She widened her eyes in surprise. Work? Yes. Everything you haven't done all these years. She was silent, digesting my words. I waited, and then she nodded. Okay, I'll do it. I smiled. The tests were just beginning. I sat in my chair, staring into the semi-darkness of the room. The man who had been thrown out on the street 10 years ago was looking at the woman who was now asking for help. Linda stood across from him, confused, with a darkened look in her eyes. She used to shine. Her life had once been carefree. I sighed. Do you really have nowhere to go? She shook her head. No. I knew it was true. She had no more money, no more friends she could trust. She was alone. I could have just pointed her to the door. I'm sorry. This is your problem. But I didn't. Something in her eyes touched me. Fear, hope? I wasn't sure. I exhaled slowly and said, okay, you can stay. Linda blinked in surprise. Really? I nodded. But there are conditions. She froze. What are they? I leaned forward, looking her in the eye. You have to prove that you are worthy of a second chance. Linda nervously sat down on the couch. I'll do whatever you say, John. And I smiled. That's a good answer. She tensed up. What am I supposed to do? I stood up and paced the room. First, you are no longer queen. There are no servants in this house. You will work. Linda blinked. Work? Yes. You'll cook, clean, do things you haven't done all these years. She was silent. I could tell she didn't like it. The next day, I gave her first task. Make breakfast. Linda pressed her lips together. I don't know how to. And I crossed my arms over my chest. You'll learn. She stood at the stove holding the frying pan tentatively. I watched her try to cook the eggs. When the dish was ready, I took my first sip. I smiled. It was not good. Linda clenched her fists. But I tried my best. That's not enough, I said calmly. You have to be able to do it well. She turned away so I couldn't see her eyes. The next day, I instructed her to clean the house. I came back in the evening and found her exhausted, with a rag in her hands. Linda was standing in the middle of the room looking at me. I did everything you asked. I looked around the room. It was clean. I nodded. A good job. She looked surprised. You won't say I did something wrong. I smiled. You're trying. It shows. She sighed. I saw her eyes change. For the first time in years, there was no arrogance in it. 2 weeks passed. Linda changed. Shy woke up before me, made breakfast, cleaned the house. For the first time, she did something not for herself, but for someone else. One evening we were sitting in the kitchen, and she suddenly asked, Will you ever forgive me, John? I looked at her. I said, I don't know. She lowered her head. I was an idiot. I didn't answer. Linda swallowed. You gave me a second chance. And I didn't even give you a minute when you needed help. I sighed. You said it yourself. She looked at me again. But what if I do better? What if I prove that I've changed? I didn't say anything for a long time. We'll see. Linda, I gave her another chance. But was I ready to take her back? She was no longer the woman who betrayed me. She was different. I had changed, too. Could we start from scratch? I didn't know the answer. But I decided to give it a chance. Because sometimes even the greatest pain can be the beginning of something new. Linda stood by the window, staring at the twilight city. So what now? she asked quietly. I leaned back, looking at her. You tell me, Linda. She pressed her lips together. I don't know, I smiled. Oh, it's weird. You always knew what to do. She shook her head. Not this time. Silence filled the space between us. 2 months had passed since the evening she had shown up on my doorstep. 2 months during which Linda had been proving, or perhaps trying to convince herself that she had changed. She cooked, she cleaned, she learned to live simply. No expensive things, no glamorous parties, no pretend friends. However, I knew that the real question was still in the air. Do you want to stay? I asked her bluntly. She looked at me as if she wasn't ready for this question. Would you like to? I laughed. Don't turn the tables on me, Linda. And I'm asking you. She didn't say anything. I moved closer and looked her straight in the eye for the first time in a long time. What are you afraid of? She blinked in confusion. I didn't look away. Because you're afraid. Nay, I can see it. Linda lowered her head. I'm afraid that if I stay, you'll never forgive me. I didn't expect that answer. You think I'm holding a grudge, don't you? I sighed. Linda, I passed this stage a long time ago. I would if I hated you. I wouldn't have let you cross the threshold of this house. She paused. Then what is it between us? It was a question I didn't know the answer to myself. I was used to her presence. And I saw her every morning, listened to her voice, smelled her perfume, even if it was cheaper now than before. But did I love her? Did she love me? Or was it just a habit? And I don't know, Linda, I answered honestly. But I don't want us to live a lie. She nodded. I don't want to just stay, she suddenly said. I was surprised. Then what do you want? She sucked in a breath as if afraid of her own words. Oh, I want to fix everything. I looked at her silently. And if it doesn't work? She swallowed. Then at least I'll know I tried. I thought about it. Am I ready to take a second chance? Is it worth everything I've been through? I looked out the window. Somewhere out there, in the big world, there was a life waiting for me to choose. A life without Linda. A life without her tears, her fear, her remorse. But did I want that life? I went back to her. She was waiting for my decision. I took a step forward. We cannot change the past. Linda pressed her lips together. But we can try to change the future. I looked her in the eye again, and finally made a decision. I stood by the door and watched Linda pack her things. Her movements were slow, as if each thing she packed was another reminder of everything we had been through. She stopped, picked up an old photograph of the two of us, still young, smiling, happy. She ran her fingers over the image, as if trying to feel that moment again. Then she looked up at me. Is that all? I asked quietly. I didn't know what to say. For a whole week we talked, weighed our options, tried to understand whether we had a chance. And every time we came to the same point, we had changed too much. She was no longer the woman I once loved. I wasn't the man she was marrying either. Life had passed between us, leaving wounds that not even time could heal. Linda sighed. Are you sure? I nodded. And you? She thought for a second, and then nodded slowly. We both realized that if we could do it all over again, we would have done things differently. But you can't change the past. I remembered how we built this house, every conversation about the future, every plan that seemed so real. I remembered her laugh, her touch, her kisses. I remembered how she walked away from me without looking back, and how she returned 10 years later with eyes full of fear. Was I sorry? I don't know. Linda took her bag and came to the door. We stood opposite each other, not knowing how to say goodbye, shake hands, a hug, say something important. And we were just silent, only glances, looks that contained more words than any conversation could contain. She took a step over the threshold, another one. She stopped. She looked back. I hope you'll be happy. I smiled. And I hope you will be too. She nodded and the door closed. I was left alone. A few minutes passed before I sat down in a chair. The house seemed empty, although, in fact, it had always been so. I looked at the photo that Linda was holding, and suddenly I realized, This is not the end. It was the beginning of a new life. A life where I no longer hold on to the past. A life without Linda in it. And maybe that was the only right choice we made. She took the house, and 10 years later she came asking for help. This story is about betrayal, loss, and the unexpected return of the past. 10 years ago, the main character was left with nothing after a divorce. His wife took his house, bills, and seemingly everything he had. He went through severe trials, but managed to get up and find a new meaning in life. But here's an unexpected twist. The ex-wife who ruined his life comes back and asks for help. Will he forgive her, or will he take the chance for revenge?